The morning felt ordinary, yet something in the air carried a weight Lucas couldn't explain. He adjusted his son's backpack in the back seat, the boy humming quietly, unaware of how fragile his father's heart felt. Since his wife's passing, Lucas had built walls so high even he forgot what lay behind them. Life had narrowed to work, silence, and routines, until this day, when fate pulled him out of his carefully constructed distance. Driving through the school gates, the city's noise seemed far away, replaced by the chatter of children running across the playground. Lucas almost turned back, wanting to avoid the bright colors, the cheerful voices, the painful reminder of a joy he no longer knew how to feel. But then his son's small hand tugged his sleeve, grounding him. "Walk me inside today," Leo said softly, looking up with hopeful eyes. Lucas hesitated. He hadn't stepped inside a school in years, hadn't let himself wander into spaces where laughter and innocence lived. But something in his son's voice made him nod. Together they walked through painted hallways lined with drawings of suns, trees, and stick-figure families. Families. The word itself stung. When they stopped at the classroom door, Lucas forced a smile, ready to leave quickly. But the moment he turned the handle, time betrayed him. His breath caught in his throat. Standing at the blackboard was a figure from a life he had buried deep, a woman who once held his heart in her hands. She turned and her eyes froze on his. The world fell silent, and in that silence, Lucas felt the first crack in the walls he had built around his soul. Lucas stood at the doorway, unable to move, as if his shoes had taken root on the polished floor. His son's laughter filled the room, but he could only hear the echo of a name he hadn't spoken in years. Maria. She had once been his future, his dream, his everything, until time and choices built walls between them that neither dared to climb. And now here she was, not in a memory or a dream, but real, breathing, standing just a few feet away. Her eyes told a story before her lips could form words. They carried surprise, pain, and a quiet strength that made his chest ache. She whispered his name, and in that instant, Lucas realized that years apart had done nothing to erase the bond between them. Leo, still oblivious to the tension, hugged her around the waist and smiled up at her. "Teacher Maria is my favorite," he said proudly. Maria bent down and kissed the top of his head, her voice tender. "You're my bright star, Leo." Lucas felt his world shift, because in her tone was something that went deeper than a teacher's affection. It was love, quiet and protective, as though she carried a secret too heavy for a child to notice but too powerful for a father to miss. Lucas's throat went dry. He wanted to ask, to demand, to understand why fate had put them here. But the words froze behind his lips. The bell rang, children flooded the classroom, and Maria turned back to her board as if nothing had happened. But before she did, she looked at Lucas once more. It wasn't anger. It wasn't joy. It was a question, unspoken, but loud enough to haunt him. "Did you know?" He walked away with his son's laughter behind him, but the sound that stayed was Maria's voice calling Leo, "My love." And that was the moment Lucas knew. This was not the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a truth that would change everything. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maria's face in that classroom, familiar yet distant, warm yet filled with questions she never spoke. He tossed in bed, staring at the ceiling as if the answers might be written there. Leo slept soundly in the next room, his soft breathing a steady rhythm that only deepened Lucas's turmoil. For years, he had convinced himself the past was locked away, that what was gone could never return. But today, he had looked into Maria's eyes and felt the sharp truth. Some stories do not end. They wait for the right moment to return, and this one had returned carrying the face of a child. The next morning, as he prepared Leo's breakfast, Lucas asked a question he had avoided the day before. "Tell me more about your teacher," he said casually, though his hands trembled as he poured the juice. Leo smiled. "She's the best. She always listens. She helps me even when I don't ask. She says I remind her of someone." Lucas froze, the glass slipping in his grip. "Of someone?" he repeated. Leo nodded, unconcerned. "She never says who, but sometimes she looks at me like she already knows me. Like she's known me forever." The words struck deep, rattling the fragile calm Lucas tried to keep. That look, the same one Maria had given him years ago, was now given to his son. A storm of possibilities swirled in his chest. Could it be? Was Leo's bond with her more than just a teacher's kindness? His heart raced with fear and hope. Fate had placed Maria back in his path. But why now? And why with a child who carried a resemblance too sharp to ignore? Lucas knew he couldn't run from this truth. Not anymore. Lucas found himself waiting outside the school the next day, his pulse loud in his ears as children streamed past with laughter and backpacks bouncing. He wasn't there for the morning routine. He was there for her. His son waved goodbye cheerfully and disappeared into the classroom, but Lucas didn't follow. He stood in the hallway, unable to shake the gnawing question that refused to leave him. And then she appeared, carrying a stack of books, her steps calm and measured, her expression unreadable. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the world shrinking until only the two of them remained. "Maria," he said at last, his voice lower than he intended. She didn't stop, but her eyes flickered with something he couldn't name. He took a step closer. "We need to talk." She paused, set the books down on a desk nearby, and folded her arms across her chest. "About what, Lucas? About the years you were gone? About the silence?" Her words were steady, but her hands betrayed her, trembling slightly against her sleeve. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her hands still, but instead he asked the question that had kept him awake all night. "That boy, the one in your class yesterday. Who is he?" Maria's gaze hardened, but behind her eyes he caught a flicker of pain, of longing, of a secret she'd carried alone. "He's my son," she said simply. Lucas's heart stumbled. The air left his lungs. His mind tried to resist, but the truth was already written across the boy's face. The same eyes, the same smile, the reflection of his own child. "How old is he?" Lucas whispered. Maria looked down for a long moment before lifting her eyes back to his. "Old enough for you to realize what you missed." Lucas's chest tightened as if the walls of the hallway were closing in. Maria's words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. He searched her face for a trace of doubt, for anything that might soften what he already knew in his bones. But there was no denial, no hesitation, only a quiet strength born from years of carrying a truth alone. His mouth went dry. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice breaking. Maria's gaze lowered, her fingers tightening around the books she held as though they were the only things keeping her upright. "I wanted to," she whispered. But life doesn't always give us choices, Lucas. You left, and by the time I knew, you had built another life. I couldn't chase you with this. I couldn't make you stay. Her words struck him harder than any accusation. It wasn't anger that filled her voice. It was resolve. The kind that comes from living through heartbreak and deciding to survive anyway. He thought of the boy, the child who carried his own face, who had been growing up without his father, 1,000 missed birthdays, first words, first steps, all lost in the silence of years. Lucas staggered back, his hand pressing against the cold wall. "He's mine," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Maria looked at him then, and for the first time, her eyes softened. "Yes," she said quietly, "but he's also mine. And everything he is today, I built that alone." The hallway filled again with the sound of children's voices, pulling them back to the present. Lucas's heart ached, torn between regret and the desperate need to make things right. He knew in that moment that his life would never be the same. The past had caught up to him, and the future demanded an answer. Lucas drove home that evening in silence, his thoughts spinning faster than the wheels on the road. The city lights blurred past his window, but he saw none of them. All he saw was the boy's face, Maria's son, his son, and the years he could never reclaim. At home, Leo rushed inside, humming happily about his school day, unaware of the storm inside his father's chest. Lucas sank into the armchair, staring at the floor, his hands trembling. For the first time in years, he didn't feel in control. He felt powerless, caught between guilt and longing, between what was lost and what might still be saved. That night, he stood by Leo's bed, watching his son sleep. The innocence on his child's face broke him. "I failed you once," Lucas whispered under his breath, "but I won't fail again." He knew then that his life had reached a crossroads. He could walk away, bury the truth like he had buried so many feelings, or he could face it, fight for it, no matter how painful. The next morning he went back to the school, not as a parent dropping off his son, but as a man ready to confront his fate. Maria was standing by the playground watching her students laugh and play. For a moment she looked untouchable, like a figure carved from resilience. But when her eyes met his, Lucas stepped forward with a courage he had not felt in years. "I don't want to waste another day," he said firmly. "If he is mine, then he deserves to know me. And you deserve to know I'm not walking away this time." Maria's eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the boy running in the sunlight, his laughter carrying through the air. Then she turned back to Lucas. "This isn't about what you want, Lucas," she said softly. "It's about what he needs. If you're ready for that responsibility, for him, not just for me, then maybe there's a place for you in his world." Lucas felt the weight of her words settle over him, heavier than anything he had carried before. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the weight. He was ready to bear it. And as he looked at the boy who carried his reflection, he realized this wasn't the end of a story at all. It was the beginning of a new one built not on regret, but on redemption,